So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Paul Clayton with us today. Paul is the Senior Vice President for the U.S. Meat Export Federation. And today we will learn and discuss the complexities of beef exportation and the challenges in foreign trade markets. And also he will discuss future predictions. So with that, I'd like to welcome.
Good morning. Some of you are probably thinking, oh my God, this guy's going to talk for 40 minutes on social media. No, I'm not going to do that to you. Why I showed that was to show you what globalization is all about. Talk to any one of these students in this room. They'll tell you how to talk to the world. And that's what we're going to be doing. The future is that we are going to have to communicate with the world if we're going to move our products. And whether you like it or not, you already are globalized. Our beef industry is globalized here, and it will continue to globalize. For all of the things that Dr. Schroeder just talked about is we are so darn efficient with the technologies we use, and our animals are superior to that. Let me brush through a few things that we do as the U.S. Meat Export Federation. We represent U.S. beef products all over the world. That may be from various kinds of advertising, of course, in all different kinds of languages. We try to cater directly to that consumer, present it to them right there at the showcase and tell them exactly what the product is all about. We may do it in stores that you're familiar with and a lot you're not very familiar with. We do it in public transportation, so it's in front of the consumer all of the time, or as much as we possibly can. We'll even give them a taste of what that product actually tastes like. That's a big one. We are on social media, because we're going to try and hit consumers every way we possibly can, and maybe even go back to simple things as putting ads on the side of a delivery truck. And yes, we do have Facebook pages. How many of you know what Facebook is? Everybody under 30 years of age raised your hand. Yeah. And so it's really important that we get a message out there, and our message is a good one. We got a really, really good message out there. It's one of the tastiest things you'll ever eat in your life. And we can sell that. Consumers love the taste of fed U.S. beef. And the thing is, we do such a great job of producing it. We genetically manage these things to get the greatest efficiency we can out of the genetics. We feed them, for one thing, utilize grains and high energy feeds to produce that. We have very, very high food safety standards. It's all quality managed. What Dr. Schroeder mentioned, you do write down procedures because you have procedures and instructions you want done. That's called quality management. And it's a very integral part of our business, from cow-calf all the way up to when that product is delivered. One of the big things we have is we got a consistent supply. Because we feed, we've got a year-round 365 supply of chilled, high-quality beef. Our competitors don't necessarily have that, but they're getting there. They're getting there. Grass-fed or seasonal type products tend to have to be frozen for a period of time because they're only harvested or mass harvested in a certain cycle. And then of course this creates all kinds of versatility. Bottom line is, it's a very positive eating experience. We can prove it. There's university research showing that. Well, when you look at this, what we're boiling it down to is we sell what sells and has value. Sometimes cattle producers come out to me and say, well, you guys are just exporting all the good stuff. Well, depending on what you think is the good stuff, not much. We just don't export those things. You bet, we hit some resorts and we'll sell some prime steaks in those areas, such as in the Caribbean or maybe in the Mexico resort areas, maybe some of those places in the Mediterranean or possibly even in Southeast Asia. But what we're selling is value, and we're trying to improve the value of various cuts. And a lot of times we're going to take cuts where they have lower value, not necessarily today, but there still is relative to that, there's lower value, and try to improve that in a lot of places. So you'll see higher numbers. 90% of this part of the animal does go overseas. We're trying to move as much of these because these things can sometimes be tough to move, and we're able to move those in a lot of different markets. How many of you eat this stuff? Raise your hands. Oh, wow. What's the matter here? Maybe your parents, probably your grandparents. You're not going to eat it. There's just no way because you got all this other good stuff to eat. Why would you eat that stuff? There's a lot of people that do. And I'll show you some numbers here in just a minute. There's a lot of value in that stuff. And that's why the international market is really, really important. And it's amazing. It still holds true today. We eat everything except the moo. And that's just the fact that's always going to be out there. And that 7 billion consumers out there, there's a market for those kinds of things. The amazing thing to me is how much value is in some of this stuff. By putting things into the right market, and I'm not here to say that everything has to go exported. We need to put products into the markets where they have the greatest value. That's why some of these things break out that way. You take tongues into Mexico and Japan at $4.40 a pound. How many of you would pay that for a tongue here? That's what I thought. Some of you guys must because you raised your hand when I asked. So some of you must be. But that's $8 a head. You take livers, 53 cents. They're not worth 20 cents here hardly. That's another $4 a head. That's because they're so heavy. 12 to 15 pounds per animal. Short plates, which is the side of the animal, another $4 a head, $1.64. That was getting to be close because when I was talking to Dr. Tonser and Schroeder last night, they said trim prices are getting up that high. But that continues to click up in the markets overseas also. Another $4 a head. Bone and chuck short ribs, $3.50 a pound. Amazing price to me that something with a bone in it is going to go that high. Another $4 a head. When you add all those up, we're putting about $239 per beef from international markets by putting more value on them. And that's the point, is that we want to find markets where we have value. 10 years ago it was 136, so that's $100 in 10 years. Obviously there was a catastrophe that happened in between there, and we all know what that did to us. So bottom line is, we go all over the world with products. Mexico, Canada, Asian markets are very big for us, like Japan and Southeast Asia. Europe, it's amazing how much it has grown. South America, and let's see, the Middle East, another area where we get a lot of value. In 2012, that was $5.5 billion in sales. In 2013, $6.3 billion. So it's not a small market for us by any means. It's very valuable to us. Where does it go? Where is the trade? I kind of listed a few of those areas. I think what you have to do is think a little bit about how do we get stuff over there. And that's the real trick. And that's the big difference between merchandising things in the United States and merchandising things overseas. You might have to translate a label and call it something else, but you also got to get it over there. And a lot of times I get cattlemen that want to get into the international market, and they forget one big piece. It takes about 3 weeks to get it from here to there, especially into Asia. Now that's an advantage, because if you're sending a chilled product, you automatically give your customer an aged product, a wet aged product. and it makes it a very uniform product when they receive it. So that is an advantage to us. But if you look today, you probably have noticed by now that most of those are Asian ports. So guess where the population growth is going to be? Yeah, you bet. You got Los Angeles on there, Dubai. This is a very unbiased chart. I got it out of National Geographic. So it doesn't, weight it in any particular way. It's pretty unbiased. A couple of these ports are actually Singapore, Hong Kong, probably Shanghai. Those are distribution ports. They distribute all over the Eastern hemisphere. So it's, and this is all kinds of goods. Biggest ship in the world, things the size of an aircraft carrier. Most container ships can be filled with 3 or 4 of those cranes. There's 11 sitting there. This is probably the future, is we're going to have more and more of these. I heard, and I don't know this for sure, there's one to be launched here before long that'll be on the East Coast. This thing goes to 2 ports. Anybody want to guess which 2? LA and Hong Kong, back and forth. And they're not empty. They're bringing goods back and forth. So whether we like it or not, we're still going to have some kind of trade internationally. And that's going to happen. And it's important that we be involved in that because we need to find the markets where we have value. I've kind of expanded this out a little bit more. Everybody knows this, that we have a growing population. The United States is not going to change a whole lot, the blue line on the bottom, but the world will. We all know by 2030, which most of the students, you're going to be in the middle of your careers. So this is very important to you because a lot of these challenges I talked to today are probably going to still be here. By 2050, as you end your career, we're going to have 9 billion people on Earth. And then when your children, believe it or not, grandkids, great-grandkids for some of you, will be, at the turn of the next century, almost 11 billion people on Earth. And we know there's an equation out there. Just to get to 2030, we're going to need 70 to 100% more food just to feed that population. So we got a big challenge in front of us. It's an easy one. Now, Ted and Glenn didn't give us a very good picture this morning about how we're going to do that because that's kind of a slow process. But you've got, 85 years to do that. So I'm sure that can be easily accomplished. The thing I think you've got to analyze here is who's going to buy it. We know that the middle class is going to be the people that eat the most. That's the way it is, the way with consumers. They'll have the wherewithal to purchase meat products, particularly beef, because beef is always going to be a little bit higher priced than some of the other animal proteins. Asia Pacific, of that we've talked about earlier, that's going to be the big one. That's where your markets will be in terms of population. And you can see that as you go down the line, there'll be less and less of that. And that's just the demographics or the dynamics of those particular countries in the age and where populations will continue to grow. They got to have money. And I think one of the better ways to measure that is through the GDP or the productivity, if you will, of a country. About every 20 years, the world GDP doubles. Okay, so that's a way that we can measure the buying power, or who's going to be able to purchase. Who's going to produce will be the next question we have. Well, our economist gave me this, and of course I had to have a full translation because I have no idea what these things mean. I'm kind of like Dr. Odie. I'm not very good at the economic thing, but to put it in simplistic terms, the bigger the distance is between the green dot and the top of the blue bar, that means you got more arable land, meaning you have the capability to produce feeds, whether it be grass, grains, what have you. Subsequently, you can raise animals, okay? Notice it's South America, North America, Middle East, and Oceania. Oceania would be Australia and New Zealand. Those are the guys that are going to be in it. So we're in it whether we like it or not. We do a lot of other things that make us pretty efficient, so that puts a lot more value for us to feed the world. So I believe that's probably the way it's going to look for quite some time. Now let's do some comparing on per capita consumption of beef against who has the power to purchase, or the GDP. These are the beef-producing countries of the world today. They are also the highest meat eaters, okay? We have the purchasing power, we have the dollars, we also have the biggest bellies to eat that. These are the guys we want. These are our guys. These are our future. Because theoretically, these all should start climbing up this thing as time goes on. Hopefully their economies, which we know places like here and here, they have a lot of money. Of course, these guys have always had a lot of money. So we just need to start displacing some of those other proteins and things that they eat with beef. So this is a pretty good model for us to just look at of where we can gather some more consumption. If you look at world meat production today, you got to look at it in terms of total animal protein. And that's the way we have to look at it, because beef is very, very different than any of the other animal proteins. Most of the other animal proteins are price-driven. Ours tends to be more quality-driven. You saw some of the prices up there, $4.50 a pound, and with livers are at 50 cents. Now there's a price-driven item. So we have to be very cognizant of that. Notice that the line or the trend of the animals, number of animals, is going up slightly, but the trend of meat production is much steeper. We are getting more efficient worldwide. Also notice that you have a big band right here of cattle and a pretty narrow, or a narrower band here compared to pork. We all know that. It takes, 16, 18 months to get 500 pounds of meat off of a single cow, right? She has a calf, and then it turns into beef. A pig does that twice a year, maybe a little over 2 times a year. They produce about 1,300 pounds of meat in a single year. So we're always going to have more pork on the market. Good, bad, supply, demand, yeah. That's probably why some of the prices stay up there in some respects. But you can see that efficiencies of proteins on the meat side continues to go up, even though animal numbers probably don't grow as fast as those. Let's take a look at what our competitors do. They do a lot of different things. Because we have the high quality product, and USMEF's job is to promote that. Do you see that up there on this guy? Not really. They have a different product. It's more grass-fed products, very lean. They have a wide range of cuts that they'll use, but they do talk about food safety. They talk about traceability, which is very interesting. That they would now, really from that standpoint, they're doing it from a commercial standpoint. And I can show you some pictures here. Watching in the background pictures, you will see there's a lot of green pastures and things of that nature. And you'll see that is mainly what their image is they can tell you about the product. Not necessarily be able to track it per se. They can tell you about the life of that animal, or you will, or the life of the product that you're purchasing. Guaranteed halal. Well, Australia has changed their mode. The world changed and they followed it. Notice in the early part here, the blue, the red have all declined. They're sending less to the US and less to Japan. They have gone 10 times more to China, twice as much to the Middle East, and a little bit more to Korea. They find value in those markets. They don't find value here anymore. Mainly our market here was trimmings for our ground beef business. That's going to put a little strain on us because ground beef is very popular here. How many hamburgers do we eat a day in this country? How many? Somebody said 3 or 4. Yeah, I didn't mean your personal consumption. I'll get to you in a minute. Anybody, take a guess. How many servings? 200 million is an extremely good one. It's 120 million. That recent report that Robobank put out had that number in there. In a population of 311 million, correct? Billion? No, 11 million. 311 million. We eat 120 million servings of hamburgers a day. Somebody up there is eating more than one. Yeah, it is amazing that is our cut. Everybody has it every day in tacos or whatever. It's an amazing, and they don't care what you pay for it. Price of hamburger continues to go up, 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 up. We don't care. We'll eat it. So it's a very interesting cut. Nowhere else in the world is that happening. It's very slow growth in ground beef consumption. Brazil. We had a question earlier about that. Yeah, they got to manage animal disease. The other thing is they are rapidly increasing their productivity agricultural-wise. I think that's an interesting picture. I think there's 30-some combines on that soybean field. these guys are getting after it now. They're clearing some place off. They're gonna produce. Mostly grass-fed today. Personally, not maybe the best genetics that are out there. They are genetics that work for that country. Disease control and heat tolerance and those kinds of things. Very small yield on the carcasses and what have you. So, but they're coming. They're coming along, and we're going to see them in the marketplace every year getting stronger and stronger. Mostly in manufacturing meats today, meaning grinding type material, not necessarily for ground beef, but that kind of material. Our neighbors to the north, probably the closest we have in quality, actually identical to our quality in terms of the way they're fed. They tend to do a lot of things that we do. They're just not a very big market. They just don't have a large number of cattle, and they do export quite a large number of their product. How many do you think India would be on this list as a competitor? Huge. You can't believe the amount of meat they put out there. It's mostly Indian buffalo beef called Kara beef, but it is a manufacturing meat that hits the market. Again, an animal protein that hits the market. It is mainly byproduct of their dairy industry. They have a lot of disease problems. They have a 30% calf loss. And I think, in reading about this, so I'm guessing here actually, I'm guessing that when bulls are born, they don't pay a whole lot of attention to them. They spend a lot of their resources on the female calves because they want to get her right into that milking herd. So they tend to lose a lot of bulls. And they don't necessarily have a feeding system to take the bulls up to get them slaughtered and turn them into meat. So it's kind of a bad situation, but don't kid yourself. They're going to figure it out and get there. And I've been reading a paper on them, and that's one of their main goals is to get those bulls up into the meat piece. So their animals are typically multi-purpose, a lot of disease control beyond just calf losses. Obviously, they have a different wildlife situation that maybe we do to deal with different diseases, and I'm sure there's different diseases that hippopotamus have that we don't. Mexico, that's the surprise to me. Mexico has been a huge customer of all. Now, all of a sudden, in the last couple of years, they have become an exporter. So we're probably not seeing as many cattle live cattle, feeder cattle coming to the United States. They're kept down there, being fed and then exported. Notice their messages: safety, anxiety-free, tasty from the sunshine country. Again, not necessarily that they're talking about traceability, which I think they have up there. No, I guess not. The fact is, I can tell you what they're about. How were they raised? They're raised in the sunshine where it's nice and clean and a very pure environment. So definitely a contender that we're watching out there. Not terribly big today, but definitely watching them. And I think another interesting one is we're seeing the reemergence of the EU. The EU is basically, just couldn't, they had such a devastating problem with BSE, as you well know. That's where it originated. It's pretty well behind them now, just like it is with us. They're starting to get out there, trying to cut some free trade agreements with Japan, trying to do a great big one with the United States. We'll see how that goes. They did get improved on, that helped them was their BSE classification. They want to triple their spending on their ag marketing capabilities. So we're probably going to see them more outside of the EU. The EU is made up of 27 countries, and they used to trade with one another. They're going to try and get elsewhere. It's real funny, different kinds of product. United Kingdom, they have a product very similar to ours. It's fed, it's got some marbling in it. Rest of the country, mostly bull meat. So, it's kind of a diverse kind of product that they actually produce. Just some general observations. Most of those countries are more export-oriented, so they have big cattle herds beyond what they can consume is what that means, beyond their self-sufficiency. Canada and Australia are like at 60%. New Zealand is 80% export. Very aggressive in their marketing. I'll show you some ads here in a minute. Traceability, again, I want to say that from the standpoint, it seems to be more commercially, but they do kind of jab us a little bit because it took us a while to get our program. So a lot of their advertising was jabbing at the US because they couldn't say high quality beef like we have, so they had to say something else. So I think they use traceability as some jabs at us, and they do produce to market requirements. Here's some ads that are floating around out there. Notice they have used it, traceability you can trust. Down here with Canada, Canadian Cattle Identification Program, again, making them aware of those kind of things. This is a very interesting one here. Sorry about that. The grass moving into the barcode. The barcode is so universal for all consumers. So it's kind of that connotation that it's for the consumer. The word naturally healthy. We don't necessarily understand that because they don't understand what we mean by natural. You know, ours is, of course, a coin term, meaning that it doesn't have certain things or it's a different production system. When we try to use that in foreign markets, they go, what do you mean it's natural? Of course it's natural. It came from the earth. Okay, so that gets confusing to them. But they do use it from the standpoint of, again, where did it come from? A little bit about its background. A new one that's floating around, sustainably raised, grass-fed, and fully traceable. And then naturally aged with 120-day shelf life. Whew. They really laid it on the line on everything that they have. Again, I think you all have heard some of the talks. We have difficulty understanding what the word sustainability means, and I'm not sure what they really mean by that word. Probably environmentally friendly, like a lot of people look at that. Let's shift gears a little bit, talk about some challenges that we have out there, and then how do we turn those into opportunities. First off, I have to bore you for a few minutes about what government regulations are all about. Countries have sovereign rights, just like this country. We have sovereign rights, and we're going to exercise them. So do other countries. We just got to try and convince them that we want to be a very good trading partner with you, and we can build business together. That's what we want to try and do. If you're a country that does belong to the World Trade Organization, which most countries do, places like North Korea, Iran, some places like Somalia and places like that don't belong to the WTO. You know, they're not very friendly with anybody. So most other countries are. You have obligations, mainly to cooperate and do free trade. If you do not do that, there is a process called dispute settlement, which means they will take you to court. Taking a country to court is a long and laborious process and takes years. Do you want to sacrifice loss of market share while you try to go through that? And that's always a dilemma countries get into. And so a lot of times we don't see a lot of those things, and we just kind of try to negotiate our ways through those things. International standards are important. For animal disease and animal welfare, you have the OIE standards, or the World Animal Health Organization. For food safety, there is Codex, and these are standards that countries can use. If you choose not to use that standard, you must provide a risk assessment. Now, a risk assessment is just saying that my science is better than the rest of the world. Everybody agree with that? Dr. Odie, all the science that the Animal Science Department at Kansas State University is no good. Are you happy with that? No, you're not. You would take me to dispute settlement right now, or take me outside and whip me. And that would be his dispute settlement. That's what happens is countries try to prove that my risk assessment says the rest of the world is wrong. And so there gets to be a lot of battles and negotiation and what have you. We've had a series of trade barriers. They can be two ways. Tariff-based means tariff is a tax that a country may put on products coming into their countries. World Trade Organization tries to eliminate a lot of those things, and that's why free trade agreements come about. The word free, meaning you free yourself of some of those things. However, some countries try to exercise their sovereign rights by putting SPS barriers. SPS stands for sanitary, phytosanitary, or technical barriers. Animal welfare, food safety, animal welfare, food safety, animal diseases, so on and so forth. Those are ones that we deal with a lot, and I'll show you some of the challenges we have relative to that. And then, of course, you have the free trade agreements. Big one that's going on right now is the Trans-Pacific. 13 countries along the Pacific Rim all are going to try and get together and get organized into one large Trans-Pacific partnership. And then the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is with the US and the EU. So what we have to be even more cautious of, and this is a development that's been occurring over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe 10 years actually. And so you students who are going to go out in life in the next 30 years, this is going to be your life. Private standards are going to become more prevalent in what I believe. We're already there with the Global Food Safety Initiative, animal welfare standards, and sustainability. Sustainability we've just seen in the news, but companies like this are going to set those standards. Reason they set those? They're everywhere. They are so global. What government do they choose to follow the standards? Walmart's in 13 countries. If that number is over here is red, they're in the United States. Carrefour, 31. Ahold, 24, which is Acme stores here in the United States. That's why we're seeing that, is they are global companies. Let's look at food service. With just QSR restaurants, all of these names you're very familiar with. They're all U.S. brands. Why don't you look at this column right here? Look at the number of units compared to the number of units in the U.S. Here's U.S., out of the U.S. Where do you think McDonald's focus is today? Have they saturated the hamburger market in the United States? That would tell you they have. I don't know if they have or not. They're building more restaurants overseas than they are here. We're seeing that similar trend, maybe not to that magnitude. Here's Burger King. They're about halfway there. If you want to look at chicken, they've already surpassed their piece. Subway's moving that direction, so on and so forth. To look at that even at a closer level, at a particular country, the same companies, and this is just in Russia. You have double-digit growth in 1 year for those brands and triple-digit for that brand. So the world is changing, and that's why we're going to see private standards change, and more of that is they're just everywhere, and they have to set a standard on their own. So the Global Food Safety Initiative is a good one that happens out there. These mainly are run through process-verified programs or some method of doing it through an International Organization of Standardization, ISO standards. Global Food Safety Initiative, USDA process verified is very common. Most natural programs are under that connotation. Some grading programs, such as your certified breed programs or what have you, are under that system. They're private. They're not talking about food safety or animal disease. They're talking about regulating the specification, if you will. The Global Food Safety Initiative doesn't have a government involved. That's all private, but they use actually a British standard worldwide. So lots of jobs out there, guys. Think about that. There's going to be lots of opportunities for this as things move on. Foreign animal disease. Talked a little bit about that earlier. The United States has a very robust system. It's been just tremendously active throughout the years. Took a little bit of a sting in 2003 with BSE, but we have a very robust system. One of the things that happened to us that slowed us down a little bit is we did not have a national traceability program. And that was the ability for us to really track animals. Now, personally, it seemed a little nonsensical that we were getting all fired up for 4 animals. At the time, it was 2. We're putting all this effort in. But countries were saying, hey, you got to play by the rules. International rules say you're supposed to have that. Once we got one started, we all of a sudden got reclassified, and markets started to open up. Dr. Tonsor and Dr. Schroeder helped us actually this was back in 2011. And we wanted to know what the real impact was. Very complicated chart, which is their fault, not mine. You come down on the left-hand side here, I have the countries that are exporters, and those across the top are the importers. What I want you to focus on is for the United States and Canada, notice we don't necessarily have a lot of green lights or red lights. So that means we don't have a lot of direct opening, we don't have a lot of blatant stops. We have some countries that are wide open. They can do whatever they want to. Notice we have a lot of little language in each one of those boxes. That meant we had to do something extra to meet their standard. So what happened is when you have to do something extra, that means more cost. So for us to participate in those markets, we had to do more things. We weren't out of the markets. We just had to take a little bit more effort to do certain things. Today, that's migrated away a little bit. Of course, we have the ADT, which y'all are familiar with that today. I understand yesterday in the news, they said they're going to start doing monitoring on that, monitoring for compliance. A couple were eliminated. We got a greater expansion in Japan, so the traceability piece of that we did not have to do anything direct or special. And same thing with Hong Kong, which should be happening just any moment now, where we'll see an expansion in Hong Kong. So again, those are process verified type programs. How big a curse was BSC? Our economists think it's that big. I'm not sure if you guys have looked at a number, but it was a big one. A 10-year period, that's a lot of money. That's a heck of a lot of money. And we're still out in a few places, but our negotiators are working on that. We need to get in China. That's a 1.2 billion market right there. Australia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, some of the South Americans. Things are starting to loosen up in these, in which we just had limited. The limitation mainly is we couldn't sell meat from animals over 30 months of age, so cow products. And hopefully we can get those loosened up here. My hope is that'll all happen within 2014. I'm not sure about the full market openings, how graduated that will be. And I don't. My crystal ball's got such a big crack in it. It's not even worth using. Residues. Dr. Schroeder spent quite a bit of time talking about technologies that we use today. I won't belabor this. I think you're all pretty familiar. We have agencies that go through the science and evaluate the science and the efficacy of these things. For anything we spray on a crop that maybe, and then subsequently fed to an animal, has to have, those compounds have to be approved by the EPA or the FDA. Anything we put into an animal has to be approved by the FDA. Years and millions of dollars go into proving those things are safe. The result of that is an acceptable level in the meat. That's called a maximum residue limit. That in turn, and I'm making this very simplistic, so any veterinarians, I apologize for not saying this properly. From that is established the withdrawal, which you're probably all more familiar with, and that's why you have withdrawals, because at that point it's at that maximum residue limit, okay? The advantages, huge, absolutely huge. If you guys have ever read this study from 2004 that Elam and Preston did, it's absolutely huge to us. I mean, the gains are astronomical. That's why we're so efficient. That's why we can put high quality beef out there at reasonable prices all over the world. And the story's right there. We are the most efficient in terms of cattle production. That's a big advantage to us. What we run into is several countries, as Dr. Schroeder mentioned, well, he said here, but several countries don't like that science necessarily, and have been very slow in providing a risk assessment on why they don't like those things. The EU is very influential out there. The European Union has a belief that's called the precautionary principle. Fundamentally, that says you have to be beyond a shadow of a doubt sure it's not going to have anything left in it, because we don't want anything in the meat. Can any of you be 100% sure? Absolutely not. I mean, that's unrealistic. That's a political statement. We live off what we call a risk-based system. Minimize the risk, because we know nothing is absolute. We know nothing is 100%. So that's what, and most of the world believes that. But that tends to catch a few places that give us some problems. And then, as the advent of the beta-agonists came on, which really provided a lot of pounds of meat for us, that increased. The concern elevated. Now, I just put a yellow line through the Zilmax because it's currently off the market, which I assume will be back on at some point. But we just have the two that we have to deal, or the two brands we have to deal with. What happens with these countries is they'll do one of two things. They'll either do a complete ban, which means you can't use the product. We have that situation actually with the EU, and that goes through a whole political thing, and I could spend the next 3 semesters discussing why that all went, so we'll just belabor it and just say that's the way it is. Russia is talking about doing the same thing. As you know, we're not in that market anymore. So you're going to have some kind of a program that proves you did not feed it at all. And in the case of EU, same way with hormones. Russia hadn't said anything about hormones. However, they started bugging Australia about it, particularly with TBA. So little handwriting on the wall with the Russians. Japan did establish what we call an import MRL. That import MRL actually fits in with the Codex standard or the international standard. Perfectly legal. It is lower than what the US standard is, the FDA standard. The companies indicate to us we still can meet that with our normal withdrawal, so we should be okay. Taiwan did the same thing. Ironically, Taiwan didn't do that for pork, which, crazy stuff again. So their pork producers are real radical, and those pictures that Dr. Schroeder had of the guys Yeah, they had a huge demonstration in the middle of Taipei about 2 years ago, throwing manure on the steps of their Congress, and nasty stuff. But that's their pig farmers were doing that. China sets a 0 MRL. Okay, where's your risk assessment? We haven't seen that yet. So we're into political battles with them. But the opportunity is we can do those things, and we can still supply those markets if we choose. The thing is that that makes that a little bit difficult, and I'll show you why I believe that here in just I go out on a limb and make a philosophical statement here. The other thing is analytical capabilities vary by country. We've actually had Dr. Aplio from the Vet College here at K-State go over and look at different capabilities of countries. It's all over the board, on their abilities. They tend to use the instructions, the laboratory instructions that the pharmaceuticals designed for testing the product in meat products. It's just shoddy lab work. They don't do the lab work very well. And so that gives you some funny answers from time to time. So what's the issue? Why? Why do they do this? Well, fundamentally, I think it's frankenfood. These governments are out there trying to protect their consumers, so they restrict this thing. They believe there's something harmful there. That can be influenced by European beliefs, the precautionary principle, frankenfood, it could be activists, I don't know. It's just there, and we know that it happens. The nullified acceptance of FDA is troublesome. FDA used to be almost an international standard. Not so much anymore. And that's, I think, a lot of political issues of the way the U.S. is looked upon in the world today. So the veterinarians in other countries do that. I have to commend the pharmaceutical companies. They've really diligently worked to try to get those products registered there. They typically registered where there was cattle and didn't necessarily register where there was going to be beef. So over the last few years, we've kind of changed that so they get registrations on as many places as they possibly can. I know that's difficult for them because there's all kinds of intellectual property rules that are different, and they cannot protect their products as well. And so I commend them for really working hard on those kinds of things. To go out on a limb and philosophize here a little bit, I think fundamentally consumers are generally price driven, at least American consumers, but everywhere they are. But if they are aware or believe that a product may have a harmful substance, they may choose a product that provides some assurance there's no harmful substance. We all know what they could pick a natural, organic, whatever. In the United States, they have that choice. But by the same token, they may say, oop, that's too expensive for me. I'm going to take the risk and buy it at a lower price. So risk has value. We know that. What's irritating about this is these foreign governments don't give them the choice. They say, we'll just protect our consumer. So that's a different philosophy between the way we think here in the United States, because we think on a risk-based, whereas they think on, I'm going to give 100% pure satisfaction that it'll be safe for them. Now, we know that the European government stops every European car before it starts out every morning to be sure that seatbelt is on, right? So what's the difference? What's the difference? Politics. It's politics. Food safety. This is one thing that does not cross my desk very often, and I'm looking at it from the standpoint of bacteria, microbiology. Interesting that Dr. Schroeder said this to us today. That is a campaign, this is the campaign we use in, our, going back the wrong way. Asian markets. To trust. And we show them all of the things we do food safety wise and why they don't need to have any concerns. It started out being to trust us relative to all the things we do for BSE controls, SRM removal, the feed controls and what have you. We migrated that into total food safety. Notice we do use the green pasture. Again, trying to give the belief that it's a full-fledged system. So a lot of consumer education. We try to see what other countries do that we're in relative to food safety, and then how advanced is their food safety. Most countries, it's not very advanced. We are decades ahead of most countries out there today, including some pretty sophisticated places. because of this. It's a complex system. I worked in this system for a number of years when I was at Montfort, and it's very complex to work with. The big advantage is this piece right here. This is something a lot of countries don't have, and that's a scientific community. And that provides that assurance, and you know, the university systems are really important for those things, whether it be the animal science departments, the microbiological departments, the vet schools. Huge, huge, huge. And we spend good money on it. I think that's one of the big advantages. We spend a lot of money to keep those things going. That thing feeds all of these other pieces, which is important. The other component that evolved in my lifetime is the fact that we then started measuring foodborne illness through a system called these CDC Sentinel sites, and that's through the Center of Disease Control. So every time someone shows up at a hospital in the United States with foodborne illness, they will test you for all of these pathogens. If there are a number of you that have that problem, they will start looking in your refrigerator and asking where you have been eating the last 2 weeks. And they will track down where that food is to try and stop that. Subsequently, that's why we have seen recalls. And we just are not that far advanced in the world today. United States, Canada, I think Europe is just starting that. So when that happens, we may see more and more of these things. Again, I think we've got to be cautious, and we're watching this very closely, is how good is their capabilities in doing these things, laboratory analysis and what have you. I would be remiss if I didn't speak a moment about animal welfare. This is probably the best baseline I could find worldwide relative to what the philosophy or the beliefs, the factors are, the 5 freedoms. Very few countries have something like PACO or an auditing system out there. Quite honestly, it isn't an issue except the United States, Europe, and Australia. Other countries just don't. And I'm not real sure why. I think maybe they just have the belief that, yeah, we got to eat these things. They're there for us to eat. I don't know. I have kind of a quirky belief in some senses. I think countries, as they start to embrace pets to a big end, then we may have more things. Places in Asia, pets are not a big deal for people. You know, they actually have problems with wild dogs in the urban areas and things like that. So maybe so. I don't know. Lindsay, that's a good study for you. Yeah. I think you all know this. This came out in 11. The issue is we, as an industry, meat industry, you know, we're just bombarded by them guys, the activists, having a gob of money, and they just beat us up. And what's bad is about every month or every 2 months, there's something on social media. What was it, 2 weeks ago, we had the swine in Kentucky on social media? You know, it's what Dr. Schroeder said is true. We've got to figure out what to do. And for me, that's not very difficult. We don't see a lot of that today. I mean, we try to endorse whatever is happening, and of course, what the U.S. does, which I think we do a pretty darn good job of those things. There are international standards, which we follow pretty closely. The only standards that are written are mainly about transportation, as well as maybe some euthanasia, controlling stray dogs and things of that nature, research animals and what have you. They will be writing more standards for production levels. So they have the slaughter of animals, you know, at packing houses, but a lot of those standards are not written. It is by the World Organization for Animal Health. So we do have some international standards that are there. A lot of countries, I don't know if they're going to apply them. It doesn't seem like it's a big issue to some of them. One thing we do watch is what happened with the gestation cages. How many of you watched that? No hog farmers here? Oh, there we go. Yeah, of course. Very interesting situation here. As you know, it started in the European Union. They said they wanted the hog farmers in Europe to phase out the use of these gestation cages, you know, around 2013. You can imagine the inefficiency that could create. I mean, piglet loss would probably just skyrocket. The way they did it, the activist group that got involved, they put on the internet, again, social media, a wall of fame and a wall of shame. And they went out and asked all these end users, grocery stores, supermarkets, restaurants, do you endorse having no gestation cages? If they said no, they got on the wall of shame. They said yes, they got on the Hall of Fame. So guess what most of them said? Who wants to have your brand name up on a... So that's why you saw, I don't know, there was a period of time in the news, it seemed like everybody just, we just saw 2 weeks of these guys saying, yeah. So those are things where, that can be very, very touchy. Never really picked up anything anywhere other than I know in Europe than here, maybe a little bit in Australia. In the review, they're looking at dehorning and castration. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It means you just got to use some pain mitigation when you do it. So some anesthesia when you're doing that. Okay, they're just clicked up the cost of doing that some more. So things we got to watch. I would guess, Dr. Odie, you guys are developing curriculum in animal welfare for our students because they're going to, I guess that's what you do, Lindsay, and that's good. This is going to be probably one of our bigger challenges out there today. To finish up here, I think just in summary, the good news is, and I spent quite a bit of time on our opportunities early on, we have just got a tremendous product that we can sell out there. It's easy to sell. It is very well liked. We try to teach the Koreans to eat those tomahawks. So that's crazy. Why would we do that? That's not their cuisine. But get that little smile on those kids like in that top. That's what we want to try and do. A very differentiated product fits about anywhere. We have the ability to be very price competitive through our efficiencies. I didn't talk about the value of the dollar. Basically, the value of the dollar is very important as we keep a weak dollar that allows us to export. So that means we're going to bring that foreign currency at a higher, monetary value back to the United States. And that sounds like a good deal to me because we're taking their money into our country. And that's a good deal. So that raises our economy. When that flip-flops, we become an importer. So when we get a strong dollar, we start importing things. So, for us in animal or into any kind of agriculture, that's important to us. Future of don't get me wrong, that's not the only thing. That's just one of the components. The future will need to still remain leader in animal health, food safety, animal welfare, and sustainability to remain competitive. So those are all things that I know are on your plates. You guys work on those things daily. You've probably had to add more things. If you want to talk about sustainability relative to environmental things, a lot of you spend a lot of time on those things and efforts. So I thank you again. It's been a real pleasure visiting with you. More than happy to take, we can take some questions and maybe create more confusion.
Are there any questions?
Paul, my question is, with this kind of growth in demand for ground beef in the U.S., and you mentioned that that's not happening, but do you anticipate that will happen? Is that just a lag? So in other words, as you see entities like McDonald's and Burger King really get established and grow in these other markets, so do you anticipate that ground beef demand then grows in those markets? And if so, how does that affect export markets?
Yeah, I think it's going to be slow. It's not. I just at this point, there's just not the appetite for those. Even though those companies are growing, they're in a lot of different places. But when you think about the United States, we're only about 10% of the world. So when they spread out their stuff throughout the world, it's not as concentrated as it is here in the United States. I think it'll be slow growth. Today, they resource all of their raw material from non-U.S. sources, with the exception of Yum brands. Yum is Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and Pizza Hut. They try to source from U.S. sources. Okay, that's pretty difficult because it gets consumed so rapidly here. So they do resource from other places, but have to meet their specification. There are a plentiful amount of that raw material for them to do that on their limited basis that they're out there. At one point, McDonald's aggressively went out and was going to have a central station on the, I think in Sydney, to feed just Asia and try and grow that total market. the drought hit Australia, and they had to, of course, back off on that thing. One of the things that is interesting about the way that cattle are broke in foreign markets is they do produce a lot of trimming, but a lot of that is not used for grinding purposes as we think. It's used in sausages and in a lot of other type items, other than us just the regular hamburger. So there is a lot of business for that. The buffalo meat goes into that same business. So there's material to do that. It's just not in that same form that we're accustomed to. So yeah, it could grow and get bigger. It's just not as much. A lot of times the trimmings are sold as trimmings. It's not ground up. They just sell, people buy just chunks of meat and cook it, So it's pretty I think it'll be slow though.
One more question.
Do all of these political upheavals we have, like now we have Russia, and every day there's some happening someplace, does that really have an effect on the business we do with those countries?
It can. The example you gave, mainly because Obama said we're divorcing trade with Russia. So now we didn't have a beef market with them because of the reasons I listed up there for scientific reasons, or what they think are scientific. Yes, it can. When you get into these political upheavals, and it can stop trade. The most detrimental thing relative to trade is, remember I told you you get 3 weeks of shipping time. That means you got a pipeline that's full 3 weeks, not just a day. You got 3 weeks. And if they cut you off, what are you going to do with that 3 weeks of product? It's either got to come back to the United States or you got to divert it elsewhere. So that's the dilemma you went in when you shut you out of a market. That was the disaster on the 24th of December in 2003. We were trying to find homes for a lot of meat. And you can imagine 1,000 containers of meat a day we ship out of this country. So yeah, those things can be disruptive. That's the risk that the packers take, but being in international markets is the pipeline, the 3-week pipeline, particularly as you go to Asia and Mexico and Canada. That's a 1-day pipeline, 2-day pipeline.
All right, let's get our speakers another round of applause.